The Legend of Zelda has an arsenal so deep that some of its most powerful tools never actually hurt anything. Today, I'm breaking down every iconic Zelda weapon and what makes each one tick, starting with the one that deals exactly 0 damage. Lens of Truth. Most Zelda weapons exist to kill things. The Lens of Truth exists to make you realize the thing you're standing on isn't real. Obtained in Ocarina of Time by defeating Dead Hand at the bottom of the well, this item does 0 damage, has no combat application whatsoever, and is still one of the most important tools in the game. The Lens of Truth is a pure perception modifier. Activate it and suddenly invisible objects appear. Fake walls dissolve and passages you walked past 15 times are now wide open. The entire bottom of the well dungeon literally reshapes itself when you look through the lens. The puzzle isn't combat. The puzzle is seeing. But here's the thing, it constantly drains your magic meter while active. So you're stuck in this tension between I need to see what's real and I'm running out of the ability to see what's real, which is, not ideal when you're standing in one of the creepiest dungeons Nintendo ever designed. And here's a fun detail, you didn't actually need it. Every puzzle built around the lens could technically be brute force through trial and error. The game made its own perception tool optional, trusting players to either find it or stumble through blind. Bold move for an item that literally shows you the truth. But if seeing through illusions sounds powerful, wait until you get a tablet that can freeze time, manipulate metal, and generate ice out of thin air. Sheikah Slate Runes. Here's the thing about the Sheikah Slate Runes, they're not weapons, they're phone apps. Nintendo looked at decades of giving Link swords and bows and hammers and said, what if we gave him an iPad instead? And somehow, it worked. In Breath of the Wild, you pick up 4 runes within the first hour. Remote Bomb, Magnesis, Cryonis, and Stasis, all downloaded from guidance shrines on the Great Plateau, like you're installing apps from the world's most dangerous app store. Remote Bomb lets you detonate explosives with precise timing. Magnesis turns every metal object into a potential projectile. Cryonis spawns ice pillars out of any water surface, creating platforms that didn't exist 3 seconds ago. And Stasis freezes objects in place, letting you stack kinetic energy and launch them into the stratosphere. Every single one works in both combat and puzzles. 4 tools, all available immediately, all usable, from the opening moments to the final boss. Nintendo handed you the entire mechanical toolkit at the start and said, figure it out. No unlocking the fire rune in Dungeon 6. No earning the ice ability halfway through the story. You just have everything. Which is, a bold move, but the community took it further than anyone expected. Players discovered sequence breaks, puzzle shortcuts, and combat techniques the developers clearly never anticipated. Magnesis launching a metal box at terminal velocity into a Hinox's face was probably not in the design document, but here we are. But if you think a magical tablet is an unconventional weapon, wait until you hear about the weapon that came before every bow in the series. Slingshot. The slingshot is the weapon that changed everything and then got absolutely 0 credit for it. You pick it up inside the Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time, and it's the first ranged weapon most players ever hold in a 3D Zelda game. It fires Deku Seeds. It's adorable. And it quietly demanded that one of the most important targeting systems in gaming history exist. Here's the thing. Before Ocarina of Time, ranged combat in Zelda was simple. You aimed in a direction on a 2D plane and fired, but the jump to 3D meant players suddenly needed to aim up, down, and at angles that a flat directional pad couldn't handle. The slingshot was one of the first items that forced Nintendo to solve that problem, and the solution was Z-targeting. Lock on, aim, fire. A system so intuitive that basically every third-person action game since has stolen some version of it. Inside the Deku Tree, the slingshot immediately proves its worth. Silver eye switches need a ranged hit to activate. Skulltulas clinging to walls can only be picked off from a distance. You couldn't progress without it. But here's the bittersweet part. The slingshot taught an entire generation of players how ranged combat works in 3D space, and then the bow showed up and made it completely obsolete. Skyward Sword included it, but only as a glorified tutorial tool you'd abandon within hours. It launched a revolution in 3D targeting and got replaced by the weapon it trained you to use, which is, not ideal. But if you think a slingshot getting sidelined is rough, wait until you see what happens when Zelda gives you a chain on a stick. Hookshot. The hookshot is the moment Zelda stopped being a flat game. Before this thing existed, dungeons were basically hallways with locked doors. You walked forward, you solved a puzzle on the ground, you moved on. Then, Ocarina of Time hands you a chain-powered grappling hook, and suddenly the entire game goes vertical. You get it right before the forest temple, and immediately, the dungeon design changes. Now you're scanning ceilings for wooden targets, launching yourself across gaps that have 0 floor beneath them, and figuring out which targets to hit in which order just across a single room. If you mess up, you're falling back to the bottom and starting over. It introduced an entire category of puzzle that literally could not exist in 2D Zelda. Then you hit the water temple, beat Dark Link, and get the long shot, which has twice the reach. But the real fun came from players who refused to wait. At Lake Hylia, there's a Skulltula perched on a tree that you're clearly supposed to reach with the long shot, except skilled players figured out that if you line up with specific invisible ledges at just the right angle, you can reach it with the basic hook shot. No upgrade required, just pure stubbornness and geometry. Here's what's wild though. By Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the hook shot is just gone. Nintendo didn't upgrade it or reimagine it. They replaced it entirely with the Paraglider, Ascend, Recall, and climbing systems that accomplish similar goals through completely different frameworks. Bold choice, killing one of the most beloved items in the series. But honestly, it worked. Still, if you think a grappling hook changed dungeon design, wait until you see what a stick that shoots fire did to combat. Fire Rod. The Fire Rod has a dual identity that nobody appreciates enough. On paper, it's a flamethrower. In practice, it's also the world's most dangerous lighter. You use it to incinerate enemies, sure, but half the time you're just lighting torches from across the room, because the dungeon designers decided you shouldn't be allowed to walk up to things like a normal person. And honestly, the combat is where this thing secretly shines. The Fire Rod spits fireballs that deal extra damage to anything combustible, so enemies wrapped in bandages or made of organic materials just catch flame and melt. But here's where it gets satisfying. The knockback mechanics create this chain hit loop where enemies flinch backward into the fire pillar and get struck again. They're basically pinballing themselves to death. You throw one fireball and the enemy does the rest of the work for you. Later versions made it even more absurd. Hold down the attack button and you get a continuous cascade of flames, turning it into a full area of effect flamethrower. The trade-off is that it absolutely devours your magic meter, so you've got maybe a few seconds of sustained fire before you're completely dry, which is, not ideal when there are still enemies alive. A Link Between Worlds gave it the best glow up in the series. Find 10 Mai, hand them to Mother Mai, and she upgrades it to the nice Fire Rod. Taller flames, wider pillar, travels farther, hits harder. It's the Fire Rod that looked at itself in the mirror and decided to start going to the gym, and the concept never really went away. Tears of the Kingdom absorbed the Fire Rod's entire DNA into the Zonai system. Fire emitters and fire cones do exactly what the Fire Rod used to do. They're just bolted onto a stick now through weapon fusion. Same energy, different packaging. But if you thought setting things on fire was satisfying, wait until you see what happens when you hit something with a hammer the size of a small car. Megaton Hammer. The Megaton Hammer is a puzzle key that someone shaped like a weapon and then forgot to make it good at being a weapon. Found in the Fire Temple in Ocarina of Time, this massive steel hammer exists for one reason: to break things the Master Sword can't touch. Rusty switches, passage-blocking rocks, crumbling walls, secret grotto entrances. If it's an obstacle and it looks like it needs a good whack, the Megaton Hammer is your guy. Here's the thing though, on paper it deals damage equivalent to the Master Sword. Same numbers, same output, and yet nobody in their right mind uses it as their primary weapon, because the swing animation is so painfully slow that any enemy with a functioning nervous system will hit you twice before your hammer comes down. It's a perfect example of game balance through feel rather than stats. The numbers say equal, your thumbs say absolutely not, but it does have a couple of tricks that make it genuinely satisfying in combat. Tektites, those obnoxious spider-like things that hop around like they've had 6 espressos, get completely flipped over by the hammer's impact, just upended, helpless. And Skullwall Tulas, clinging to walls, one slam nearby and they get knocked clean off, instantly dead. No repeated hits, no careful aiming, just raw concussive force solving the problem in one go. What makes the Megaton Hammer interesting is how remarkably narrow it is by design. Most Zelda items try to be flexible. The hammer doesn't. It breaks specific rocks. It hits specific switches. It solves specific problems. And that narrowness is the point. Every time you walk into a room and see a rusty switch, the game is telling you exactly what to pull out. It's not a weapon. It's an environmental signpost shaped like one. But if you think a glorified puzzle tool is underwhelming, wait until you see what happens when your shield starts bending. Light, mirror, shield. Most shields in Zelda exist to not die. The mirror shield exists to kill things back. First showing up in A Link to the Past as the strongest shield available, the mirror shield immediately set itself apart. That polished surface wasn't just for looks. It could reflect magical projectiles that would sail straight through any other shield in your inventory, turning Wizrobes and laser eyes into non-issues. But in the 2D era, it was still fundamentally a shield. A really, really good shield, but a shield. Then the 3D games happened and everything changed. In Ocarina of Time, the mirror shield gained the ability to reflect actual light sources, and this single addition created an entirely new category of puzzle design. The Spirit Temple's final sequences require you to catch beams of light on the shield's surface and bounce them between mirrors at precise angles to unlock progression. You're essentially playing geometry with a piece of equipment that was supposed to keep you from getting hit. But here's where it gets genuinely fun. That reflected light doesn't just solve puzzles, it kills things. Floor Masters and Redeads, two of the most terrifying enemies in Ocarina of Time, go from nightmare fuel to instant kills the the moment reflected light touches them. 1 second you're paralyzed listening to a re-dead scream, the next you're vaporizing it with sunshine, and the mirror shield has smart limitations. Octorok and Deku scrub projectiles don't bounce back. They just get destroyed on contact. It's not a win everything button. It's a tactical tool that rewards you for paying attention. In Tears of the Kingdom, you can fuse a mirror onto any shield for sunlight reflection puzzles, but it loses the magical combat properties of earlier iterations. No more vaporizing re-deads. You get utility, but you trade away the thing that made it legendary, which is, not ideal. But if you think a shield that doubles as a weapon is versatile, wait until you hear about the item that's been blowing things up since 1986. Bombs. Bombs are the cockroach of the Zelda franchise, and I mean that as a compliment. Every other weapon on this list has been cut, reworked, or straight up forgotten at some point. Bombs have survived every single design philosophy shift for nearly 40 years. They were there in 1986 when the original Legend of Zelda launched, and they're still here in Tears of the Kingdom doing exactly what they've always done, blowing stuff up. Here's the thing, the original game didn't just hand you bombs as a fun little extra. They were mandatory. You literally could not progress without bombing specific walls to reveal secret caves. That one mechanic, bombable walls, became one of the most defining features of the entire series. Every Zelda player alive has walked up to a suspicious wall and thought I should bomb that. That instinct started right here, and the concept just kept mutating. Over the course of the franchise, there have been 14 different bomb variants. Twilight Princess gave us water bombs for underwater detonation. Bomblings needed to be smacked before you could even pick them up, which is, not ideal when the thing you're hitting isn't explosive. Wind Waker had tingle bombs specifically for discovering tingle stations, because of course it did. But the real evolution is in the resource design. In the original game, you could carry 8 bombs. That's it. Every bomb mattered. Fast forward to Breath of the Wild and the Sheikah, Slate Remote Bomb Rune, gives you infinite bombs on a cooldown. 0 cost. Just wait a few seconds, and boom, you're back in business. That shift from scarcity to cooldown perfectly tracks the series moving from punishing resource management to creative freedom, and they're still making bombs interesting. In Tears of the Kingdom, time bombs deal 30 damage after a 4-second timer, while regular bombs hit for 40 damage plus a fire effect. Delayed precision versus raw power. Nearly 4 decades in, and they're still finding ways to make thing goes boom, feel fresh. If you think explosives are creative, wait until you see what happens when Tears of the Kingdom lets you duct tape literally anything to a sword. Zone fused weapons. This is where Zelda stopped giving you weapons and started giving you a workshop. Every game before Tears of the Kingdom handed you a fixed tool. Here's a bow, here's a hammer, here's a boomerang that comes back. Done. Tears of the Kingdom looked at that entire philosophy and said, what if the player just figured it out themselves? The fusion system lets you attach virtually any component to any base weapon, creating near infinite permutations of gear that the developers never had to individually design. It's brilliant and slightly unhinged. Here's the thing though, base weapon damage in Tears of the Kingdom is laughably low compared to Breath of the Wild. A naked sword hits like a pool noodle. The fuse attachment is the entire game. Silver Bokoblin horns add 25 fuse attack power each, while Silver Boss Bokoblin horns jump all the way to 37, turning a mediocre stick into something that actually matters. Beam emitters deal continuous damage as long as they stay connected to an enemy, basically turning your weapon into a laser pointer that hurts. Cannons attached to arrows function like portable bomb flowers with solid damage and knockback. You're not finding weapons anymore. You're engineering them. But the real depth comes from the battery system. Larger Zonai batteries hold significantly more energy than the small ones, and the game depletes old batteries completely before touching fresh ones, which means you can strategically arrange your batteries to maximize efficiency. Players figured this out almost immediately, because of course they did. And then there's durability. Each device activation drains 1 durability from the base weapon, with extended activation draining additional durability over time. Some setups burn through weapons shockingly fast, while others stretch a single build across dozens of uses. Players mapped out every single combination to find the optimal builds. It's min-maxing on a level the series has never seen before. 30 years of handing players a finished product, and it turns out the move was letting them build their own. But if Zonai weapons represent the future, the next entry proves the classics still hold up. Hero's Bow, the Hero's Bow, is the weapon Nintendo got right almost immediately, and then barely had to touch. The bow first showed up in Ocarina of Time as the Fairy Bow, got renamed to the Hero's Bow in Majora's Mask, and the core loop stayed remarkably consistent through the linear 3D entries from there. You aim, you shoot, the thing you shot at reacts. Done. It took until Breath of the Wild for Nintendo to finally overhaul the system with durability mechanics and free aim changes, but for over a decade of 3D Zelda, the formula just worked. But what makes the bow genuinely special isn't the base weapon, it's the arrow variants. Fire arrows ignite enemies and can set flammable objects ablaze on contact. Ice arrows freeze enemies and water surfaces to create temporary platforms. Light arrows deliver magical damage that tears through undead like they're made of wet paper. Each variant essentially absorbs the functionality of an entirely separate item. Fire arrows replace the fire rod. Ice arrows replace ice magic. Light arrows replace light-based spells. The bow basically ate 3 other weapons and became a single, flexible platform for all of them. And the puzzle design it enables is something melee weapons could never touch. In Woodfall Temple, in Majora's Mask, where the hero's bow first shows up as the dungeon's main treasure, you're using it to snipe eye switches across flooded rooms and hit targets through narrow gaps and rotating platforms. You're threading needles with projectiles across entire chambers. Those are puzzles that literally cannot exist without a ranged weapon, and they make the whole dungeon click together. Here's the thing that really sets the bow apart though. It's not just a combat tool or a puzzle tool. It's both, simultaneously, in every room you walk into. Shoot an enemy, then shoot a switch on the wall behind them, then break a wooden barrier across the gap, all without swapping items. No other ranged weapon in the series offers that kind of consistent versatility across that many games for that many years. But if you think the bow cornered the market on ranged creativity, wait until you see what Nintendo did with a weapon that comes back to you. Boomerang. You'd think, throw thing comes back would be simple to program. It is not. The boomerang is one of the most deceptively complex weapons in the entire Zelda franchise, and the fact that it feels effortless to use is basically a miracle of game design. Here's how it actually works. The boomerang operates on 2 completely separate flight states. State 1, it flies in a straight line away from the player for a fixed duration. State 2, it reverses and returns directly to the player. That's it, 2 states. But balancing those 2 states so the weapon doesn't become either useless or completely broken took serious work. If the return kicks in too fast, the boomerang becomes a homing missile that trivializes every encounter. Too slow, and it just feels like a worse arrow. But the real magic is in the velocity curves. Modern implementations added acceleration during the return phase and deceleration as it approaches the player, creating this fluid, natural-feeling arc that communicates exactly what the boomerang is doing, without a single line of on-screen text. You just feel it. And here's a detail that's genuinely satisfying. Developers discovered that maintaining speed through collisions rather than resetting on impact produced dramatically better combat feedback. So when your boomerang smacks an enemy and keeps moving, that's not laziness, that's deliberate. Then Wind Waker happened and everything got complicated. The boomerang gained multi-target capability, letting players lock onto up to 5 targets before throwing. 5. That required building an entire AI pathfinding system to calculate efficient routing between all designated targets, which is, not a small ask for a children's adventure game about a cartoon boy on a boat. And the puzzle applications go even deeper. Certain targets in Zelda dungeons can only be struck from specific directions that a straight projectile literally cannot reach. Vines and ropes need to be cut using the return path trajectory, meaning players have to think backwards, planning where the boomerang will be on its way home rather than on its way out. It's the only weapon in the series that asks you to solve puzzles with the second half of its flight path. Simple to use, nightmarish to design. And speaking of nightmarish design challenges, nothing in this franchise carries more weight, more expectation, and more pressure to get right than what's coming next, the Master Sword. This is the one, the weapon that doesn't need an introduction, and yet here we are. The Master Sword is arguably the most iconic weapon in all of video gaming, not just Zelda, all of it. First introduced in A Link to the Past as the blade capable of sealing Ganon away for good, it has since appeared across every timeline, every era, every version of Link's journey. Hyrule gets flooded, shattered, and rebuilt. The Master Sword remains. And then Breath of the Wild gave it a health bar. Here's the thing. In Breath of the Wild, the Master Sword deals 60 damage per hit with roughly 200 durability. It can strike around 166 times before needing a 10-minute recharge, which sounds reasonable on paper. But the community lost its collective mind. This is the Blade of Evil's bane, the sword that seals the darkness, and Nintendo said, yeah, it breaks. Give it a minute though, it'll be fine. But here's where it gets interesting. The Master Sword's true mechanical advantage isn't raw damage. Its effectiveness against guardians and malice-corrupted enemies specifically. Against those targets, the blade powers up significantly, making it a specialist rather than a generalist, which is, not what you'd expect from the most famous sword in gaming history. In Tears of the Kingdom, the fuse system lets players attach materials to boost its damage while keeping those anti-evil properties intact. So the blade stays relevant without becoming the only weapon worth carrying. But the stat that matters most isn't damage or durability. It's this: players deliberately save the Master Sword for boss fights. Not because it's the strongest option. Often it isn't. They save it because it feels right. Because walking into the final encounter with the blade that has defined this franchise for decades carries a weight no stat screen can replicate. That's the Master Sword's real power, and it's not mechanical, it's psychological. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.